Okay, so my first question is how did you become interested in the area? Because obviously your whole platform is dedicated to menstrual things. Like, what would you say your main focus is? PMDD?
Yep. Yeah, I specialize in PMDD and PMS.
What does PMDD stand for? Just in case. I don't even think I know what the two D's stand for.
Yeah, it's premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
All right. So, how did you decide that that is what you wanted to put all your focus on?
Well, it wasn't exactly by choice. It
Okay.
was through personal experience of living undiagnosed and misdiagnosed with PMDD for almost 2 decades and coming to a place where I nearly lost my life due to the severity of the symptoms. And I was able to really turn that around with integrative medicine and get to a place of symptom reduction and management in a way that I had never seen through all of the other treatment protocols that I had tried. And at that point, when you have that kind of stark experience of I'm dying every
Mhm.
cycle to, oh, I'm getting my life together. I got engaged. I bought a homestead. I mean, these were things that were never going to be possible with the level that I was functioning at cyclically. It really called me to help others do the same because it's a newer thing. It wasn't added to the DSM even until 2013, and there's just still
Mm.
so few resources. So I really felt that I had a responsibility to help others when I lived through it and I knew how really devastating to the quality of life it was.
I feel like most people know of PMS, but I think it was just probably in the last year or so that I have even heard the term PMDD. And like, I have a PhD in psychology. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It was never a
Mhm.
thing. So, what was your experience? Because you said you had, issues for almost 2 decades. What kinds of things were you going to your doctors for? And what was the response? Like, was it ever considered that it was connected to your cycle?
Yeah, so luckily my mother realized quite early on. So I started my period around age 12, 13, kind of right there in between. And of course, the tumultuous time for anyone having those hormones come online in that way. And so she started taking me within 2 years of starting my cycle and saying, "Hey, I had a cycle and it wasn't like this. This is kind of next level." So she recognized that it was connected to my cycle. Even despite that happening in adolescence, it's so consuming what you're going through. And especially as you get away from your family and they're not able to reflect back as consistently, like your period is coming soon. I couldn't recognize it. Even though I knew, right? I knew consciously that it was the cyclical thing that was happening every cycle that it would occur, which was every cycle. The psychological symptoms were so severe that you can't really see beyond. You're just in
Hmm.
survival mode. And so as she was taking me, of course, to gynecologist initially, they were just saying, well, it's going to take some time for her hormones to balance out. And this isn't really unusual, but it never happened.
Yeah. So, did you take, like you said, it took you a while to figure out what actually worked for you? Like, what are some of the things that you tried previously?
Mhm. Yep. So within allopathic medicine, so that would have been long before PMDD was specifically added to the DSM. The treatments were hormonal contraceptive, right, for cycle symptoms.
Oh,
So I was put on that at a very young age to try to regulate my moods and my cycle. And then at one point, I think I was 16 at that point, I was diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, which is one of the most common misdiagnoses for PMDD.
right. Because you're it's like these acute
Yep.
situations of dramatic,
Mm,
you know. Yeah.
it's
I
very
never even
similar.
thought of that.
Yep. Yeah, so then I was on antipsychotics
Oh my
at age
gosh.
16. Um, and that just really led me to completely dismantling my life because when you're treated for something that you don't have, and even those medications, I mean, they massively can impact
Mhm.
your functioning. My frontal lobe was not developed at that point. Like my whole life fell apart.
So how old were you when you like, did you just kind of hit rock bottom and then you were like, "What is going on? I'm gonna figure it out." Like, or was there a specific doctor that you ended up seeing and they, like, opened your eyes to this whole other way of, living? Like, what was it that made you kind of figure it out?
Mm. I wish that had been the case, but it was not my experience. I did have to hit a rock bottom point, and it was a series of rock bottoms, but there was this really low point in 2017 where I things had not been going well. And we can talk more about the symptoms because people hear mood disorder and it's just not really an understanding of what that behavior looks like.
Mhm.
And you're just kind of there's a lot of stigma around it too. So I had just very tumultuous relationships. And I had been on and off with a partner for 6 years, and we were going to give it a go. And I was just at this point where I was like, I really don't want to mess this up again. So I went to the physician, another gynecologist, and I said, I have severe PMS symptoms. I had that language. Still, no one had ever said PMDD to me at that point. I had to find that the diagnostic criteria on my own. But the physician again was like, well, let's put you back on a hormonal birth control that you had been on for a long time. And you seem to be fine. But of course, I didn't have any self awareness. I had no metrics of how I was tracking its efficacy with my body. I was still a child. So I was like, fine, yeah, great. Whatever I need to do to not have these psychological episodes. But it sometimes the hormonal contraceptive can have a adverse effect, and it did. And instead of having the symptoms for 2 weeks, I had them the entire month. And so I
Mm.
single-handedly dismantled, lost my housing, lost the relationship, lost jobs, like everything within a 4-month period of time. And I
Oh my
went to the
gosh.
physician and I said, like, I am suicidal. Like, I can't stay on this. And the response was just, it's going to take a little bit longer for it to even out. It takes time for your body to adjust to these medications. And I just couldn't make it. By the 4 month time period, I had lost everything. And that was when I really had to step back and say, I'm going to die. Like, I will die because of this, or I have to find something else. And I have tried various different forms of antidepressants, antipsychotics. At that point, like 10 to 12 different hormonal contraceptives. Like, it was not working. I needed something else. And that's where I started to get into integrative medicine and really started to see a change. But it was a life or death point where I can't
Mhm.
do this. This is not living.
And that's the frustrating thing, like, for anybody that's struggling with whether it's, like, anxiety, depression, or PMDD, it takes so long, first of all, to, like, see the doctor, to get your prescription, then to take the medications, which always come with, like, all these other symptoms, but you have to be on it for X amount of time to see if it works, and then you're like, "Well, shit, this one's not working." Now you have to go back to the doctor, get a new prescription. It's and if you're really struggling, like, this is, it's kind of a nightmare until you find something that works for you. Um, I'm super interested in your story. I know, like, I was like, "Oh, do you wanna come on and talk about, like, general stuff?" But, like, I just this is probably so relatable to so many people, like, maybe not, the severity that you experienced it, but I'm sure so many women every time I talk about symptoms and like hormones and cycle. And the thing is, a lot of us have been on birth control for so long. Then we go off of it to have kids. And then we don't go back on it after having kids. And we're like, what is going on? You know? Um, what are some of the things that you first started integrating into your life? Like changes that you started to make? Was it like diet, supplements? What was it?
Yep. So I think the main, and this is probably not going to be what you expect, but the main changing factor for me was the education. Because yes, we can take the supplements, yes, we can make the lifestyle changes, but the adherence to those changes, it isn't super high if you don't understand your body. And what I recognized early on, and this is so unacceptable, I was 28 when I realized that there were 4 phases of the menstrual cycle.
Oh my, tell me about it. Honestly, like I knew there was like phases, like I know. It's wild.
It's just unacceptable. And so that really was what started changing things, where I was like, whoa, I'm trying to feel better. I'm trying to address this, but I don't even know what's going on the most basic fundamental level.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that, right, with that education, I was able to then start experimenting and making changes when I understood what the body actually needs to have a healthy menstrual cycle and what a menstrual cycle even is. And so that's where I start now with people too, because, they do just want to feel better, of course, but your body is experiencing these symptoms. They're messages, right? Body system dysfunction and symptoms are messages of what needs support. So at the end of the day, we need a paradigm shift around, yeah, you just want to feel better, but you don't want to disappear those symptoms because they're the information that you need to make the changes. And if you don't have that education, you're just, out in a boat without a paddle. Like there's no hope for you.
Yeah. It really struck me because like you were saying, I wasn't that familiar with, I wasn't understanding that the shifts in the hormones could cause so many things. And so I remember seeing a naturopath for something completely different, like my digestive system. And we were like working together a lot. And then one day she randomly asked me about my sleep. And I was like, yeah, I sleep really good. But there's like a stretch of time every once in a while where I'm not sleeping. Like I'm wide awake or I'll wake up at 2 a.m. And she was like, keep track of when that happens. And I bet you it's the week before your period. And I was like, oh, okay. Like random. So I did that. And sure enough, the week before my period is exactly when it happened all the time. And that was my like awakening moment of, oh my gosh. And so now I'm starting to piece so many things like the irritability and the moodiness. And I think like we just are living on autopilot and we're just like, go, 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 go. And we don't actually take time to think about like, where am I right now in my cycle? We beat ourselves up because we're exhausted. We're tired. We have all these things to do. But now I'm starting to pay attention like, oh, it's the week before my period. Like my body needs rest. So instead of doing XYZ, I'm going to actually make my calendar for the week and give myself time to chill. And I just, I want everyone to learn all of this stuff. And I don't know all of it by any means, but maybe what we can do then, because as you said, like we didn't know about the phases of our cycle. And I still am like, I know the phases, but I want to learn more about what is happening in each of those phases to our bodies. So maybe we can just go through that, like the cycle, what it looks like, and what's happening, but also what are common symptoms that we could experience in that phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can run through that. I think one thing to add on to what you're saying there is that there's just a stigma right, around
Yeah.
females of, oh, she's moody, she's hormonal. And because of that almost dismissal, there's really no more, it just stops there.
Yeah. The
And
conversation just ends.
it just ends. And those things aren't, false. Yes, we are hormonal, but there's a misunderstanding between male and female hormones and how powerful in general hormones are. And there's a huge lack of education around what are hormones. Serotonin is a hormone, dopamine is a hormone, insulin is a hormone. There are so many hormones that are not sex hormones, right? Or stress hormones that play into the conversation, and just really recognizing how powerful your body is and that it can create severe psychological symptoms. And that I feel like that's just something that is omitted. Like allopathic medicine is over here and then psychology is over here. And it's like, wait, the body though, guys.
Yeah.
The body is all
Right?
connected, right?
I know. Yeah. So which phase should we start in? I guess
Yeah, the menstrual phase is the first,
menstrual,
the starting.
which we're all familiar with.
We are, yeah. So the first day that you're fully bleeding is day 1 of the menstrual cycle. And this is too where that metric collection, a lot of us track our cycles, but when you're experiencing any sort of symptoms that you think are maybe linked to your cycles, having more tools to really more in-depth pay attention to those symptoms is really important, especially when it comes to PMDD. So day 1, menstrual cycle, you're bleeding, that endometrial lining is shedding, and it's the lowest point of your sex hormones. Because of that, the hormones drop, the endometrial lining sheds for 3 to 7 days. It's different for everyone. There are certain things to look out for as far as quality, volume, viscosity. Everything about your menstrual cycle is giving you information about how your body is functioning. So that bleeding phase is going to be the menstrual phase.
And so when the sex hormones are progesterone and estrogen, correct?
Those are
is that
the primary known sex hormones, but there's FSH and LH. There's testosterone females have.
okay? So those during the menstrual phase, those hormones are at their lowest levels.
Yep.
And so does that make us tired? Does that?
Yeah, symptom wise. So that is a massive vascular event, shedding the endometrial lining. It requires a lot of energy physiologically to make that happen. So you will likely feel more fatigued, especially if you're dealing with any, heavy bleeding and iron, imbalances that can perpetuate that fatigue even more. But cramping, bloating, some symptoms, you're going through, like I said, a major vascular event. So some symptoms are to be expected. They should never be debilitating. If there are if it dips into debilitating, it's a sign that something else is going on and we need to address it. And something I want to say here too is that the menstrual cycle in itself has been recognized by the American Academy of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the American Academy of Pediatrics as a vital sign in females from the time of menarche, that first period. So, whoa, who's thinking of their menstrual cycle in that way of like, this is actually right up there with my body temperature, my heart rate, my respiratory rate, it's a big deal.
And so what are the signs, if that is the case, what should we be looking for to say, oh, my cycle is healthy or my menstrual phase or, my period is healthy?
Yep. So if you are bleeding less than 3 days, if you're bleeding longer than 7 days, if you're losing more than 80 milliliters of blood or less than 30 milliliters of blood, we want to kind of monitor that, which is hard to do unless you're using a menstrual cup.
I know, literally, when you were just saying that, I was like, okay, my period seems so heavy, like in the last year or so, ridiculously heavy. And now I'm like, I want to use a cup and like collect it in a jar and measure.
Yeah. Well, and you can do some calculations with a super tampon is going to hold this much.
I guess. Yeah, okay, so I
But
guess I could, like, use the cup, kinda, like, gauge how much is in the cup, and then write it down, and then discard of the blood, Renee, you don't need to keep it in a jar. Oh my god.
whatever you
Anyways,
want to
okay.
do.
Yeah, whatever. It'll make for good content, right?
Definitely, definitely. Also cycle length. So the time from bleed, your day one bleed to your next day one bleed, if that is exceeding, 34,
Mm,
36 days, there's a sign that something is going on. If it's less than 24 days, 26, there are different people operate on different ranges, but around those ranges, if you're having a short cycle or a longer cycle, can be a sign that things are going on. And then symptoms. Symptoms are a
mm,
big part of it. Any debilitating symptoms, whether they be psychological or physical, can be signs of underlying health conditions, a variety. I mean, bleeding disorders, thyroid conditions, other reproductive health conditions, infections, like tons of things. So,
Does PMDD occur before your period starts? Or is
such a
it
good question.
during?
Yeah. So they're actually finding that there are subtypes of
Okay.
duration of symptoms, three particularly. That was a like 2019 study, I think, that came out. So since it was added to the DSM in 2013, I mean, now lots of more research is being done. But yes, that's the thing with these psychological symptoms. They can happen. The onset can be 14 days before you
Ugh.
bleed. So if you're having symptoms of depression, anxiety, you know, suicidal ideation 14 days before, you're not thinking, oh, it's definitely my menstrual cycle, because you're
Yeah.
not bleeding for so long after. So a lot of people are the lack of education around your menstrual cycle, the luteal phase, because the symptoms are primarily in the luteal phase. So with the subtypes, they can be 1 week before. So that's the second week of the luteal phase before you menstruate. They can be 2 weeks before the entire luteal phase, which varies in length for people. Or for some people, they're kind of the week before and then into the menstrual cycle, they're still kind of coming out of it. Whereas some people, a kind of like hallmark sign of PMDD in the past before these subtypes were revealed was once you bleed or once you almost bleed, it's like the fog clears.
Mm.
You like reemerge into yourself. And it's very quick. Like it comes on very quickly, it goes away very quickly.
Yeah. That's how I would feel with the sleeping. It was like, I'm like, okay, like, period. Come on, like, get here because I would like to sleep at night.
Mm,
It was like
yeah.
instant. Yeah. Huh. Uh,
Hormones. Powerful.
Okay. So after menstrual phase, it
Yep.
is follicular.
Yep.
And so what's happening with the hormones then?
So this is when your hormones, specifically estrogen related hormones, are starting to increase towards ovulation. So FSH comes online, which is follicular stimulating hormone, to mature the follicles. One, you're going to ovulate, but your body is going to mature multiple at a time. And then one predominant one is going to take the stage for ovulation. But that whole period of time, they're growing and your hormones are increasing. And then LH comes onto the scene, luteinizing hormone, to trigger the release of, well, to build estrogen, continue to build estrogen and help trigger the release of that egg from the follicle. And so we're starting to get our energy back. We're feeling more social. We are able to articulate our words better because estrogen has major impacts on neurotransmitters in the brain. Our sex drive is starting to increase. We're kind of like gearing up. And a lot of people like to akin the menstrual cycle to seasons. So
Yeah.
the menstrual phase would be like the winter, and you would
Mhm.
kind of treat yourself like it's winter. You would eat the kinds of foods, you would do the types of movement, you would um, rest more. Then the follicular phase would be spring, where you're kind of, you know, eating lighter
W
foods, you're
waking up.
waking up, sleeping a
Yeah.
little bit better. That circadian regulation. And then that's going to move into ovulation. Now, ovulation really is a 12 to 24 hour event that egg is viable, but those hormones are building and the fertile window is around 6 days. So
Mm.
you can kind of categorize the ovulatory phase, summer, as that kind of 6-day period where the estrogen is peaking and, you're really great time to be social, great time to be out, doing public speaking, presentations for work. You're going to be the highest energy. This is when you want to do more high intensity exercise or try things that you haven't tried before, both sexually and in life.
What was the, okay, I had a freaking question about, do you come across a lot of people who experience pain with ovulation?
It's quite common. Yeah. It's called middle schmerz, middle pain.
Yeah.
And it is quite common. If you're paying attention, it shouldn't be severe again, but noticing cramping around ovulation. And a lot of people actually notice symptoms. So PMDD onset can come right around ovulation. And high estrogen, some people are going to be sensitive to, if you're sensitive to the fluctuation of hormones, you can be sensitive to estrogen. You also can have too much estrogen, which can result in symptoms as well. So that can be happening at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, I've always, well, since I got off birth control like a long time ago, I get really bad ovulation pain. So I know exactly when I ovulate because I can feel it and I have to take like Tylenol or naproxen or something with like a heating pad. Like but like you said, it's only for about 12 hours or something. And I remember I would always tell doctors that, and they would be like, "Oh, you're lucky, when you're ovulating." I'm like, "Yeah, but like, what's going on?" And then I heard someone talk about how period cramps and ovulation pain has a lot to do with inflammation
Yep.
in the body, which I'm on like this whole inflammation kick right now because like I get chronic sinus infections also linked to inflammation, like digestion, inflammation, all the period stuff, inflammation. So is that something that you consider? Like,
yeah. Yeah. Prostaglandins and essential fatty acid balance can impact along other body systems, right? How your digestive system is functioning can lead to inflammation, endocrine disrupting exposures in your environment, diet, obviously, hydration. I mean, there's so much that plays into inflammation, but the prostaglandin balance between those that are pro-inflammatory and those that are anti-inflammatory is important. Otherwise, you're just like full in an inflammatory response. And that's where we also have to look at immune function as well, because
it's wild to me. Like the more I learn, the more I'm like, literally everything is connected. And it's almost like there's not a quick fix for anything. It's like a lifestyle of all the things, like taking care of yourself, like resting, eating, like relationships, like everything is connected. Anyways, Renee,
it's true.
Or next phase. So the next one would be luteal phase,
Luteal, yeah.
which, that's where we hear a lot about like the symptoms that you would experience before your menstrual cycle comes. I remember like a few years ago is when I learned that PMS symptoms really occur before the period comes.
Right.
I feel like growing up, I always assumed that PMS just meant your period.
Yeah, because of that stigma and lack of education. People are like, oh, she's on her period. It's like, yeah,
PMS.
you can have period symptoms, but you're probably not going to have the PMS symptoms, which people stigmatize on your period. Yeah. So it's just a lack of education. And again, that leads to a lot of misdiagnosis and undiagnosis because people are like, well, these symptoms aren't on my period. So
yeah. So what's happening with the hormones in the luteal phase?
Yep. So this is really cool. I'll try to be concise. So you ovulate that egg, and then the sac that egg exited from actually becomes a hormone secreting gland. So again, major vascular event to have a healthy follicle, because then not only is ovulation a big deal, healthy egg, a healthy process, then that same body has to produce all the progesterone for the luteal phase. So it's called the corpus luteum. And after the egg exits, progesterone is produced from that follicle, empty follicle sac. And progesterone is the dominant hormone of the luteal phase. So estrogen is going to proliferate the lining of the uterus, build it up. And then progesterone, progestation, is going to keep it intact so that that egg, should it be fertilized in the fallopian tube, can implant and the lining is going to stay intact. And then, the progesterone stays high. And then if you do conceive, that progesterone is going to continue to be produced until the placenta takes over production at like pretty late into pregnancy. I think it's like 18 weeks or something like that.
Wow.
Don't quote me on that, but it's surprisingly long that is going to continue to produce progesterone before the placenta provides the progesterone for the baby.
So is this why is it the progesterone? Like once you get pregnant, they're always checking to make sure something is continually increasing, or no,
Yep.
That's something else. I forget.
Yeah,
what it was.
progesterone.
Or is it?
Needs to.
Oh, it is progesterone.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And so typical symptoms or things that people would feel in luteal phase, like is our energy starting to drop, like moodiness, like that's all from the hormones?
Yep. So something to consider here that, again, I think is really important educational piece is that your body doesn't know if it's conceived yet because that pregnancy hormone, HCG, hasn't communicated to the brain of like, yes or no. That happens at menstruation because you either menstruate or you don't, you're pregnant. And so there's this period of time where your body mounts a defense against pathogens. So your cervical fluid actually becomes antimicrobial. Your cervix closes, right? Because nothing else is going to be coming in to fertilize that egg. That's already happened. And so your body actually and your immune system become suppressed in order to facilitate the implantation of that embryo. Because if not, right, you're never going to be able to conceive. There's a foreign body, in your body, and that we're going to attack it. So everything kind of shifts, and you go from feeling, oh, I want to be really social. I want to rub shoulders with people. I want to potentially put myself, and this is all unconscious, likely, right? Unless you're trying to conceive, put yourself in a position to conceive a child because that's your body's second ultimate goal beyond survival, to a protective state to protect the potential pregnancy. So you actually become more tired. You don't want to be touched. Your sex drive plummets. So a lot of people come to me and they're like, well, I have low libido. And I'm like, all the time? No, just, a lot of the time. Well, you're not supposed to have high libido when your estrogen is not on, your testosterone is low, and you're potentially protecting yourself from these pathogens that could impact the pregnancy. So, and there's more to consider, right? Do you have high enough progesterone to estrogen ratio? If you're going to have high estrogen, you're going to have low progesterone. So there are other things that can lead to symptoms, but there is just a universal female body. This is how the female body functions. You're going to change from phase to phase because your hormones and your brain chemistry are changing about 25% each phase.
So are some women just more sensitive to the changes in hormones? Like if people were tracking my hormones and your hormones, does it look almost identical, or are we fluctuating differently, or are some people just more sensitive to it?
I think kind of everything. There's a lot with the estrogenic environment that we're living in, the stress that we're living in. There's a lot of hormone imbalance. I mean, it's pretty much impossible not to be a Debbie Downer, but it's really hard to have healthy hormone production because of stress and because of endocrine disrupting chemicals in the environment. But people are also more sensitive to those fluctuations. So that when they look at people with PMDD, there are other genetic factors that we're finding too, but they're testing hormone levels at the different phases. And they're obviously, people are bio individual, so there's some variation, but there's not an obvious necessarily like everyone with PMDD has low progesterone. That used to be the thought because some people do, and that can lead to those symptoms, but not everyone does. So it's recognized as a hypersensitivity to neurosteroid changes in the brain, which they're finding is linked to genetics in like a molecular mechanism, essentially, and even genetic polymorphisms in genes to some of these symptoms. So we're finding more out, but at the end of the day, it's like, cool, now what? Like, what are we going
Yeah.
to do about it?
So how do people, because it's in the DSM, do women just have to meet certain criteria to be diagnosed with that? And then if you are diagnosed, what, I'm assuming it's like everything else where if you go with Western medicine, they're going to do one thing. And then if you go more holistic, like lifestyle approach, it's going to be different. Is that accurate?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Because I remember talking to my previous doctor about heavy periods, and I wanted to get all like these hormone things checked out. And because my naturopath suggested that to me, it all made sense to me. And then I went to my family doctor and she was like, "Do you get a period every month?" I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Okay, so your hormones are fine." I was like, "Thank you for your help." But at the same time, so my husband's a physician, he's a surgeon. I understand why Western medicines and like doctors' hands are kind of tied because we, in Canada anyways, have this healthcare model where they have to be able to bill the healthcare system for the thing that they are providing. And so if you're not so sick or having such symptoms that they would be able to treat it with like a pharmaceutical or something like that, their hands are tied. Like my doctor is not in the business of holistic or
Yep.
like wellness,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to fix something that's broken. And so for my doctor, she was like, "I can send you to go get your hormones tested, but regardless of what the outcome is, I'm not going to be able to do anything for you. So I'm not sending you for the tests." You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it's such like I wish people would work together more, like from a
Mm-hmm.
holistic standpoint and Western medicine, because as someone navigating the healthcare system, now I'm going to have to go pay out of pocket. I know, like I'm in Canada. I know I have lots of American listeners and they're probably like, "What?" But now I have to go do everything on my own and pay for it and like see a naturopath and stuff because the traditional medical system just can't do anything for me. So it's frustrating. And I remember her saying, because I was talking about the irritability the week before my period, she was like, "Oh, well, usually what we do is just prescribe like an antidepressant for that week." And I was like, "I don't want to do that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do that." Anyways, so I've been slowly making changes, like taking certain supplements and just being more mindful and literally like slowing down, like physically just moving slower throughout the day and being more intentional. And it's made a world of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so anyways, that's my little rant. But for people listening, if they were to go to their physician, what kinds of things are they looking for to diagnose them with PMDD? And is the treatment option usually just an antidepressant the
Mm-hmm.
week before their period?
Yeah, so I mean, we could do like an entire podcast on this topic. So I'm going to try to keep it concise. And I have changed the way I feel about this throughout time as a practitioner now versus being a patient. And we're not here to, I'm not anti-allopathic medicine. I have no negative feelings towards allopathic medicine. When I did, it was because of that lack of education. I was basically going to a cake shop and being like, but why aren't you giving me donuts? And then I was
Exactly.
victimizing myself because I didn't understand the limitations of the system and what they're trained to do. They're doing their jobs. It's not their job to
Yeah.
educate me on my body. It's not their job to find other solutions. They're doing what they can do. And unfortunately, that didn't work for me. I
Yeah.
tried all the things, and then I felt hopeless. And that's really why I came into this field, because of the hopeless and helplessness that came with misdiagnosis and undiagnosis and treatments that weren't efficacious.
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt like I was at a dead end. There was nothing else. I tried the antidepressants. So the two primary treatments, and this is really fascinating. I can super nerd out because I've done so much research around the history of PMDD becoming a diagnosis, which was lobbied by Eli Lilly and
Who's
other
that?
pharmaceutical companies so
Of
that
course.
their treatment could become the primary treatment. So when that happened and PMDD was added to the diagnosis, added to the DSM, instead of hormonal contraception being the primary treatment, SSRIs and antidepressants became the primary treatment. And along with, it's either one or the other or both. You can do both. So that is what's available. And it ends there. And that's just not true. There are so many things. And to get a PMDD diagnosis, a prospective diagnosis, you have to have only, used to be 3, 2 months of charted data, which is not that many months. Your cycle can be awry for 2 months, 6 months. And you have to meet a category of symptoms with at least only one. So you have to check 5 symptoms, but only one has to be in this category, which includes mood and emotional changes, irritability, anger, interpersonal conflict that's going to come with that, depressed mood, hopelessness, feelings of guilt or worthlessness, anxiety, tension, feeling keyed up on or on edge. So you only have to take one of those boxes, and then the others can be, fatigue, bloating, breast swelling, breast tenderness, hypersomnia, insomnia, tons of other symptoms. So it's not great. And that's something that I have changed my opinion on as I've gone forward with working clinically and running labs with, I have hundreds of students and working one-to-one with people, is that, and being in the system, at no point were labs ran to see if there were underlying conditions perpetuating the symptoms or hormone imbalance perpetuating the symptoms, because PMDD falls at the intersection of gynecology and mental health, and there's not a field there, right? So you're just getting bounced around, and no one really knows what to do because no one, highly educated, trained people and physicians, never heard about PMDD.
Yeah. And no one's talking to each other.
No one's talking to each other. So there are some major flaws, additional flaws within the system that I didn't realize until I moved into the practitioner role and started working so heavily with people experiencing these symptoms. And it's great to have diagnosis, but this, it's just a collection of symptoms. That's all it is. And people connect their identity because it's so validating to finally be able to point to something outside of yourself and say, it's that.
Like it's not me, it's that.
Yeah.
I also think, like, we live in a society where people just want to walk into their doctor's office and leave with the solution in their pocket.
Yeah.
Instead of really looking at lifestyle factors and things that they can, because it's hard to make changes to your lifestyle. Like,
oh yeah,
I totally get that, especially when you are, like, I'm naturally just like a busybody. Like, I will go, 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 go. So I have to be very, like, mindful and intentional about it. Like, okay, Renee, you're actually going to sit down. Like, I have 3 recordings booked today. I'm going to finish probably around 2:00. And I know that I don't have anything scheduled for the rest of the day and I don't have anything to do. So I'm making myself, like, not do work stuff. Whereas usually I would just go until I had to leave to go pick up my son. Like, I would be like, I'm the person that, like, puts something in the microwave and I'm like, what can I get done in 30 seconds while this heats up? like, but I'm starting to just like slow down. But I think it's like with anything, like you have heartburn. Well, I don't want to change what I'm eating. I'm just going to take this pill.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, I really would suggest that people track their symptoms, like if it's insomnia, if it's irritability, moodiness, and see where it lines up in your cycle and then start to make some changes. So if somebody is working with you, how do you, like, I'm assuming you get them to track everything and then from there you guys can start to implement changes. And what are you most likely to um suggest to people? Is it like more so about like rest and that kind of stuff, or like are you a fan of certain supplements or foods? Like where do you do most of your treatment?
mm. So what I've found is that taking a bio-individual approach to working with people is the most effective. And so I have a course that just is basically like me brain dumping everything that I have learned that I feel like people should know. And so that's self-paced. So people can go through. I break the protocol down into 7 areas, which include sleep, movement, nutrition, relationships, spirituality, stress, all of these areas where you can learn more about how to navigate specifically with these psychological symptoms and physical symptoms as well. But in a one-to-one setting, that's where I like to look at. I do a variety of assessments that really reveal body system dysfunction. And then I talk to them because I can create a protocol for you and say, you're going to quit coffee and you're going to exercise 5 days a week. And if you don't want to do those things, this isn't going to
Yeah.
work. If you can't do those things, it's not going to work. And your specific symptom presentation is going to be different from my next client. So we really have to work together to target. And that's where having a practitioner like myself on your care team is so powerful because you're overwhelmed. You're scouring TikTok and the internet for all of these things and you don't know where to start. But because of the education and training and personal history that I have with this, I can pull all your charts up and see, okay, these are a couple of areas of body system dysregulation that we really need to target. And we can do that through sleep, stress, all of these different avenues. What do you feel like you can do and is going to be the most effective for you? And then we do that and it works, right? And we run labs and all sorts of other things. But
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Like, so do you recommend, you're in the US, right? Or are you in
yep,
Canada?
I'm close to Canada. I'm in Montana.
Oh, okay, cool. Montana. Is that where like the Yellowstone ranches are, or is that
Yep.
somewhere else?
Yep. Part of in Wyoming and Montana, Yellowstone is.
Ah, cool. Um, anyways, um, do you recommend that people go and get blood work done? Is there anything else that you have people do? And like, what should people be asking for?
Hmm. So this is a qualm that I have with the allopathic approach to diagnosis is that they aren't generally running. Okay, there's so much to this conversation, but they aren't generally running necessarily basic blood labs before the diagnosis is made. And obviously, counselors and psychologists aren't running labs.
Right.
So there are some conditions, specifically thyroid related conditions or hormone imbalances that these symptoms can be coming from. So it really just depends on the investment that the particular client wants to make. I highly recommend certain labs like a CBC with differential, a complete metabolic panel, a complete thyroid panel. But a lot of allopathic physicians aren't going to run a complete thyroid panel unless you have a family history or you're checking the boxes for a lot of these symptoms. And if you're not checking the boxes for a lot of the hypothyroid symptoms specifically or Hashimoto symptoms, maybe you don't need to get a full panel and you have no family history, but the overlap is massive in symptoms: anxiety, depression, weight gain, fatigue, all the same for both. So those are like some basic blood labs that I recommend and that I run for clients if they can't hack it or if it's more economical. But something else to consider is that the ranges, like you were saying, in Canada, they're working like the US on a disease model. So their lab ranges are much broader because if you're not way out here in a disease state, you're fine.
Yeah, they're not in the business of wellness.
Yep.
They're in the business of, they don't care if you're, not that they don't care. Personally, I'm sure they do care. But the system does not care if you feel good. It's we just don't want you to be deathly ill. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
So in integrative medicine, we operate on a smaller lab range scale because we're looking at optimal health. And I don't, as a practitioner, by choice, I could have. People are always like, well, you're not a gynecologist. By choice, right? Gynecology didn't help me with this. Counseling didn't help me with this. That's why I didn't professionally take that route. So just recognizing another lack of education moment that there are different lab ranges that people are operating on. And so if I'm running blood labs and things come back and they're way out of my smaller range, I'm using lifestyle and diet and examining what's going on in their environment and their stressors and seeing, okay, where can we make changes? Where do you want to make changes that can support all of these body functions? And it's pretty easy. It feels overwhelming at first because people feel like, oh, I have to change my whole life. And what clients say again and again is, I can't believe that I was able to get these results because I just focused with them on 1 to 2 core areas because it's too overwhelming and it's not necessary. So by only focusing on a couple of areas, you can get massive results. But I think, again, there's this disconnect between, with PMDD, the population, they feel so garbage. I mean, they're dying. They're like, their life is on fire cyclically, and they're cleaning up the messes. And when you were looking at mood disorder symptoms, again, it's like moving across the country, like breaking up with your partner, cheating on your partner, having a lashing out moment anywhere on people, not being able to get out of bed, eating everything, like these like very extreme behaviors. So I must need a very extreme treatment protocol, right? Because I feel so bad. How could taking some supplements and working on micronutrient balance or blood sugar regulation, how could that seemingly small change make such an impact for how bad I feel? And that's a misunderstanding of how biology and physiology work, again. And that's good news because you have so many options.
I wonder if lots of people get misdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder as well, because those, like the things that you were just mentioning, that's exactly like, that's what I thought of right away. Which is also, if I'm not mistaken, that is pretty much mostly diagnosed in women.
Yeah. So I do these little Venn diagrams because I'm just so weird.
Yeah, I get it.
And I like put all of the symptoms for, bipolar, borderline, hypothyroidism, ADHD. And it's crazy, the overlap in some of these, even dehydration symptoms, chronic and acute dehydration symptoms. It's like, wow, a lot of these are overlapping with severe psychological symptoms. But borderline is, I would say, maybe not right up there with bipolar just because it's newer on the scene, but I do think that people are getting misdiagnosed a lot with that personality disorder.
Oh my gosh. Well, I hope people listen to this and just keep track and take note of how things are going and know that not small changes, but just they are small changes when you look at each one. Like I used to always just eat vegan options. Like I just liked that. So if we went out to eat or like I was always just ordering vegan stuff. And now I will order like steak or, it's just like I have shifted these certain things in my life that have made a huge change. So if people want to find out more, where can they find you?
Yeah. So first I want to share, I do have a free both a digital version and an analog version of what I call symptom mapping. So if you're noticing these symptoms, that's a free resource for you. Breaks it all down, how to do it. And there's the resource there if you're wanting to track or map, as I call it, those symptoms, because it's a visual representation versus just like tracking in your phone where you don't get that visual representation. I also have a supplement directory that's a free download with basic supplements that are key for supporting hormone regulation. And then I have a doctor's appointment form as well that's free to help you better advocate for yourself if you are working within the allopathic field to address the symptoms.
Okay.
But yeah, Her Mood Mentor is my business name. And so I have a website. Instagram is where I'm most active, but yeah, kind of all over the socials. If you're looking for more education and support, that's where I would find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Renee. It's been such a joy to chat with you.
And I'm on a roll.